thing I wanted to do is, just so I don't go over stuff people know, how many of you have ever actually got any EU funding? Has anyone ever applied for it? Yeah? 2, 3 people? And has anyone, apart from applying, actually managed a project? And you're a couple of them. Okay, well, that's good. I'll try not to, 2 things I'll ask. As you know, there's a lot of nuance with EU funding. And I'm not an expert, but we do have some funding. And if you want to add anything, or you think there's some points that from your experience you can share, that would be really very useful. This PowerPoint that I have here is different to what's in your book. I revised it. I sent that off just so something was there, but this has now been revised. So it's quite a long PowerPoint, and I put a lot of information into it, so it worked as a reference. So go onto the Legal Voice website if you're interested in anything, and download and get the full one, because I'm not going to talk to every slide for 45 minutes. There's just too much information, but I did think because you need to know specific information, it was worth writing it down for you to access, but we won't go through every single slide. Okay, so again, before I move on, just to tell you, the Law Centres Network has received both being partners in projects, European-wide projects, partners in just UK EU-funded projects, and we have been the lead on a couple of projects as well. Right at the moment, we're leading a project called Living Rights, which is about a €450,000 project. Its partners are only in the UK, which makes it slightly easier. It's a 2-year project, and apart from being successful on that, we would have put in at least 8 applications, I think. Some of them are successful, some of them aren't. Why they're successful or not really can be surprising, but it's something that you do get better at. So the first thing to say, that's just a bit of background on why I'm talking about this topic. But the main thing to understand, I think, that people don't realise, or maybe everyone realised but me, is that the EU budget is actually distributed across member states through little projects like our Living Rights project. As that says there, 76% of the European Union's budget is actually implemented directly by organisations in the member countries. And that was a surprise to me. And how does it work? And what happens is they have a huge strategic plan. It's directed through their policies and legislation. Then they develop these annual work plans that talk about how they're going to implement their various policies, how they're going to strengthen the legislation. And then out of those annual work plans, they then decide, well, what sort of projects do we want to fund? They don't sort of give it to their own civil servants and say, go off and set up a little bureau to implement this. They put out something like a call to Europe in general and say, who can help us with this? What are your ideas for helping us achieve our policies? And that is very important to understand, because the applications you make have you have to understand what the outlook of the European program is. If you don't read the broader document of what the program is, if you don't understand what the European-wide outcomes are, then you're not going to be successful. And believe me, I had put in at least 4 applications before I knew that. I just thought it was like applying to the Bering Foundation. They had a thing and they'll give you some money. And until I discovered that, our applications became more sophisticated, I can tell you. Now, what's the most common thing? How many of you have not applied for European funding because you think it's too much trouble? Yeah, exactly, you're right. You are right. But let me tell you, it's possible, and you do get better at it. And the reason why we've persevered and done these extraordinarily long spreadsheets with more tabs than you can ever imagine and more hidden cells than you would even know about, the reason we've persevered with that is because it allows us to do stuff that this government doesn't pay for, and particularly for law centres, as Willie Bart just said, there's no money for public legal education. And from our point of view, it's not enough just to give one-on-one advice. We see issues and trends arising, and this is a source of funding to try and do that preventative work, to try and address in a different way the sort of problems we're attempting to address. So it allows us to take a different approach. It's very important to say it's quite unusual that there'd be money just to give advice. You're not going to find money that says this is the advice fund. You know, you can see 30,000 people and give them bits of advice. There's none of that. You can link advice into it, but the advice has to be very integral to a broader program. It is not, there are no funds that will pay you for that. This is the other thing you need to know, is that the programs are 7 years, and the calls come out each year to try with different ideas of how they want to implement those programs. So we're 2 years into the new cycle. As we said before, the grants are worthwhile because they do open up other areas of work that you can't do. The other thing to say, in my experience, and I have a colleague here who ran a project from Brussels, and sorry to mention, we're a partner in a Cross Europe project that she ran. And what that project allowed us to do, it was very interesting. It allowed us, even though the reporting and everything else was hard, it allowed us to work with European migrants before they came to the UK. So it was very much a preventative sort of project. In that case, we were targeting Bulgarians and Romanians who were thinking to come to the UK. And we were so effective, not one of the people we met in their country of origin came to the UK. So it, of course, wasn't our aim, and our report was very creative as a result. But you know, it was very much because at the time, as you would be aware, there was a real fear in the UK of being inundated by all these people coming from Romania and Bulgaria, and it allowed us to get in early and try and address some of that with the people themselves. The downside, of course, is that the reporting and the procedure is incredibly detailed. But so long as you set up systems, so long as you learn how to use that gigantic spreadsheet, and so long as you set up your own internal systems to collect the receipts, collect the reports, it's actually very straightforward, because the fact of the matter is no one talks to you. You get that money. I've just waited for 2 months to get a response to a question about when would I be sent the money. So once you get those funds, it's up to you to implement the project as you see fit. And you have a fair amount of leeway, but you need to always evidence what you're doing. You can't just make up and say, oh, well, we applied for A, but we're going to do B. You can apply for A, you can do A plus or A minus, so long as you evidence it. And in that way, it is much easier funding to use than a lot of UK funding, because you're not constantly talking, ringing them up and saying, can I do this, can I do that? It's up to you to implement that project according to what you told them to do, and no one's going to talk to you about it. One key thing is, though, if you stray too far, they won't give you any more money. You know, you have to be true to it, and they do check up on everything. So you have to be very careful that you have good systems in place. Once you understand that the rules of this funding are immutable and there is no negotiation, it's fine. So, for example, the start date of a project is, say, the 1st of January. Even if all the work you've done prior to the 1st of January contributes to that project, they will not pay for one single thing before the 1st of January. And if you're audited, they will find out you did it before the 1st of January, because they really look at your diary. They really look at everything. It is very detailed auditing. But if you understand that, and if you know, so for instance, the project we have at the moment, which is this Living Rights project, we were ready to go last September, but we didn't do anything until we signed the contract, because we know from experience it doesn't work. So that's a good example of the rules that control it. But if you follow the rules, it's fine. So in general, I'll just move along a bit more quickly now. I spent time on telling you that background because you really need to understand that it is possible. It's detailed, but it's possible. It's about systems, it's about discipline and sticking to what they say. But once you've done that in this broad framework, within it you have leeway to act as the project requires. Now, there's lots and lots and lots of different funding programs, as you can imagine. These 4 are the ones I have mentioned because they're the most relevant to the sort of work we do. And the one I will speak to you the most about is called the Equality, Rights and Citizenship, obviously. A lot of people possibly have heard about the European Social Fund. In my experience, I've found it completely impossible to access. But maybe when we get to that, I'll ask if anyone here has been successful, and I'll find out why. But basically, these are the main 2 strands here. You can see that everything is divided up. The total budget for the 7 years is 439 million euros. That is a lot of money. But remember, it's over 7 years and it's spread right across Europe. It's divided up into these different things, and in the 7 years there will be 5 different programs advertised. So you have to keep looking out for them, and at the end I'll tell you where you can look out for them. Usually, and most commonly, they're advertised towards the end of the year. November, December seems to be the most common, and you usually have to put applications in around March for these ones. Others are different. Okay, so this year, in this strand 1, there is 23 million euros available. That's for 2016. You have to have 20% match funding, and I'll let you read, but these are the sort of things that this strand will cover. The 4th dot point, promoting and enhancing the exercise of rights, that is what we're funded under with our Living Rights project. That's what we applied under that one. And what we're doing is we're working with newly arrived European migrants, and we're defining newly arrived at the moment as up to 5 years. It should be up to 3 years, but because of the changes in the UK for residents and the impact of the residence test and, in fact, what Brexit might mean, our European counterpart has agreed that we can regard it as 5 years because of the specific situation here in the UK at the moment. And that's what we have applied under that, promoting and enhancing. We have also applied under the promotion and protection of the rights of the child, because we do a lot of youth-specific work. And both of those are quite relevant to our work. The other strand, you'll know, we've also been funded under the non-discrimination in the past, and all of you will understand, particularly prevent and combat racism, xenophobia, etc. Obviously, a lot of our work is in relation to that. And in fact, the last three are all fairly relevant to our work. Although they look very general, once you see the call, it can be very, very specific. Although the program is much more general, the call might actually say, we want, well, I'll show you some calls in a minute rather. That's just, I'm going to talk to you about these particular things or mention them. Now, the one thing I haven't mentioned up until now is explain about match funding and explain about partners. All the programs require partners. They want you to work in partnership. Some, you'll see here, only requires UK partners, not European partners, but it will require partners. It says co-financing, that means that Europe will give you 80%. How many partners and how do you do the match funding? What I've discovered is they actually don't like too many partners. Initially, we were worried because we'd only have 2 or 3 partners, and we thought that would bring our application down. But recently, we were knocked back on what was a really good application, I thought, and it was an excellent program. We were knocked back because they said we had too many partners. We had 10 partners. And what they said in the report about the number of partners, because there were 10 cross-Europe partners, they just thought it then involved too much money in travel and too much time managing cross-European partners. So it resulted, it wasn't a question of whether we'd be able to do it, but they said it didn't result in good value for money because so much money was spent on administering the partnership and getting the partnership together. So there is an optimum number of partners. I'd say somewhere between 3 and 5. Or maybe you can have one really good partner, but we haven't achieved that particular thing. But the partnership is very important. The next thing about partners is that if it's a fund like this which doesn't require European partners, it's quite straightforward because you'll know agencies who you want to work with. Those agencies can't just be your friend or, obviously, but you have to prove in the application that this partnership is adding something to it, that they have the expertise that the bid requires, and they ask for CVs. So they really check through that the agency you want to partner with does actually have the expertise required to deliver this project.
CVs of the agency, not going down to...
They want to know the experience of the agency as well as the CV of the key personnel who are going to work in it, because it's their method of working out that you're not just, say, Advice UK trying to get a bit of money for Advice UK, that you're exactly far from it, exactly, that you actually have expertise to do this. Now, the tricky part is not European partners. How do you find is not UK partners. How do you find European partners? And how do you know whether they're any good or not? Are they agencies you can work with? Will they send you back that bus ticket that you asked them for? That, to me, is the key definition of a good partner. That they keep their bus tickets and they send it to you stamped. So you can stick it in your folder and keep it for that dreaded audit day. But look, there are two things. At LCN, we got involved in a project about 3 or 4 years ago that was completely tangential to the main sort of work we want to do. We did it because we felt it was a way to find European partners, not just have them recommended to us, but work with them and find out what they were like to work with. And that has proved very effective. And we've since partnered with some of those agencies. There is, at the very end, there's an agency called European Access Europe, who are funded by Citybridge Trust and some others, but their sole purpose is to help organisations in the UK access EU funding, and they're terrific. And in fact, this is their slide that I've taken, and they said I could. They're really extremely helpful, and they will do a partner search for you and really talk to you about what sort of partners you need. And we at LCN are more than happy to talk to you if a partner's recommended. We've dealt with quite a few different agencies now, and my email's available. We're always happy to talk to you about that. And there's another agency, there are a number of agencies that we've dealt with now, but Access Europe is your first port of call, because it is actually quite hard to find an appropriate partner, or a partner who knows how to deal with European funding. The next thing to talk about is this match funding. I'll just whip through some of these. Match funding doesn't mean you have to have cash in the bank that you contribute to it. What it means, though, is that your organisation has to be in a position to contribute time, for example, that you don't get paid for. So the way LCN does its match funding is that, as the director of LCN, my wage is covered through various other things, but I spend a lot of time on these projects, and my time that I spend on them is accounted for in the timesheet. And that's okay, because I'm not charging it to the project, I'm contributing it. And the way in which we actually, it sounds complicated, but the way we budget for it is that we make sure we make a 20% loss on the project. That's how we do it. So the funds we get in, as far as the EU is concerned, it's 80%, but in our books, that's 100% of the money we've got to do that work. But at the end of the project, we need to have made a 20% loss. And that loss is our contribution to the project, so to speak. But that loss is actually covered through things like LCM has membership fees, which covers my wage. Come what may, we have to pay our finance officer. So our finance officer's time is contributed. That's how you do it. It's not actually as hard as it seems. But you just need to think about it in terms of what resource do we have that can contribute to this. If you're lucky, there is the occasional funder who'll actually give you a 20% grant to contribute, and you can actually get cash too. Obviously the EU prefers cash, but they'll allow you to do these other things. And there is the occasional funder that will fund that 20%. Okay.
Could you have a mix? So the 40% did 10%?
Yeah, sure.
10%, okay.
Sure, you can. It's just up to you to make sure that you make a contribution. But how you do that, there is something that's really important. Never, ever, ever say you're making an in-kind contribution. I make that mistake constantly, and they all go, no, there's no in kind. It's not in kind. I don't mean that. I just mean, that we're contributing and not being paid. But don't use the word in kind. It doesn't count. Pro bono does count so long as it's an expense you would have incurred anyhow. But I won't get into that sort of detail. What you really have to remember is there is no fund that will give you 100%. Very occasionally you can get 90% grants, but they're very rare. I'll give you an example again with the project we're currently doing. We put that application in January the year before 2015. We were told we were successful in October 2015. We have just last Friday been told you didn't send us your certificate of registration for VAT because they go through everything. And they discovered out of this pile of documents we had that somehow or other we hadn't sent our certificate of registration. I mean, I didn't even know we had to send that, which is why they didn't have it. But that's an example. The other thing is when I say there's a gigantic spreadsheet, I'm really sorry I didn't make a slide of it. But, it's like really massive. And if you've got 6 partners, it'll be pages and pages of detailed things. So, for example, obviously you've got wages is one section, salaries, then you've got travels, another section, then you've got direct project costs, which is another section. We're doing a project working with newly arrived migrants. Under our direct costs, we had a line called translation. One would expect so. We got a question back about how many pages are you going to translate? Who is going to translate? Why do you need to translate? How many languages? I had so many to and fro's about interpretation and translation, which one would assume they'd just glance over because obviously it's a multi-language project. But I spent more time justifying interpreter fees than any other line on it. And you'll be surprised. I mean, I take my hat off to the people who go through it because they look at every single cell. And I made a mistake in one cell. It was a cut and paste mistake. And they actually picked up that my conversion from the pound to the euro was different in that cell to what it was throughout the spreadsheet. I mean, how they picked it up, I don't know. It's why it takes them 4 months to tell me I don't have a VAT certificate. Okay, and look, in saying that, I'm not trying to put you off because, as you can tell, we're actually advocates for this sort of funding. You have to do it right and you have to be disciplined. And so long as you're patient, you can really work your way through it. And it's not bad to have someone have that sort of oversight because that mistake actually would have put our whole spreadsheet out, not by a lot, but at the end of the project we would have been going crazy about why hasn't it quite worked out. So it is very detailed oversight. Do you want to add to that as someone who's done a final report? Or
No.
you think that's... Yeah, thank. I've just got this one here is obviously something you can see, and you'll see they say a minimum grant, the total grant is 3 million. What you can assume by that is they don't want to fund any little dinky projects. They want to fund something that's actually going to be worthwhile. If you see 3 million, you can think, okay, they're probably going to fund about 6 projects, because around $500,000 is fairly average, particularly if you've got 3 or 4 partners. And think, okay, there's six projects are going to be funded across Europe. So what are my chances? It probably means there'll only be one that's UK-led that will get up. So it means you have to have quite a good project. You really have to have thought it out. You have to have designed it well. Now, one big mistake we made when we first started on this was we just thought, oh, we'd like to do this, or, we'd like to do a bit of PLE and get a few people together. What we've learned is the more time you put into designing the project up front with your partners, the much better application you do, and it really shows in your success rate. So detail is the point I'm making throughout this, both in project design, selecting your partners, thinking of the costs, and writing everything accurately. When I said at the beginning it's worth looking at this documentation, it's also worth looking at what they've just funded and make sure that your project builds on a theme that they've had in the past. Because if there's a sniff of duplication, you're gone. But we've never, the other thing, like all funding applications, it's online and it's word limited. So you have much more trouble meeting the word, cutting things down so it's only 200 words. So you're limited in what you can show them that you've done. Okay, this is an example. This isn't our project, but I just put it here because I thought it's something that is quite interesting, the sort of work that a number of you might do. This one's focusing on children. It's using legal expertise, and it's essentially PLE, public legal education. You can see the sort of grant for 50,000 euros, remember? You can win or lose on the euros if it's a 2-year project and the exchange rate changes. We've opened up a euro account so we can try and avoid the problem with exchange rates. But it hasn't helped that much, actually, for other reasons. Okay.
Excuse me, on the slides, will we get copies of those?
Yeah. If I've given it to David, he's put this new thing on his Legal Voice website, and it's available. But anyone can email me, and I'll send it to you directly. Okay. Now look, they were just some examples from the Equality and Rights. Erasmus, a lot of European, a lot more European countries use Erasmus than we do. It's particularly good if you're in the youth sector. Europe for Citizens, this is quite interesting. It's a pity that this referendum's happening now, but civic participation, one of our partners, their sole purpose is to encourage European citizens to vote and to register to vote and to engage in civic processes, because that's quite important at the EU. It's not simply that you get access to healthcare. They think freedom of movement actually means participating in the society that you're involved in. So this one has a potential there. European Social Fund, I said we'd been unsuccessful at that. And the reason for this is because it is much more employment focused than we had imagined. But depending on what partnerships you have or who you work, this is quite good because the big lottery will actually match fund. And that's why I put this on. If you manage to get into a European Social Fund, you can apply to the big lottery for your 20%. Okay, so this is the most important thing. It's very much points driven. If you don't get at least 70 points, you won't get it. But in looking at this, you can see it's all fairly heavily weighted, and this European added value is important. Last thing is, why are applications rejected? Well, it doesn't meet what they want. But let me tell you the other reason why they're rejected, and it's happened to me twice, I'm embarrassed to say, is that you leave it to the last minute to submit it, i.e. the day before the due date. I'm not even saying the day of the due date, and their system crashes because everyone across Europe is madly getting their applications in, and the system crashes, and it's your bad luck. You know, so we had an application 2 years ago that we actually thought had been loaded successfully because we got it in, it was the day before, and we started thinking, we've had nothing back on this. You know, this is odd. We had a look and the system had crashed partway through the uploading. So I can't, if the date is the 10th of March, don't even think about submitting anything less than the 7th of March. You'll waste your time, and I've learnt the hard way. And the embarrassment of going to your partners is even worse than having made the mistake and crying at that long spreadsheet you spent weeks over. The other thing I need to tell you is you need a month. You cannot get an application prepared in less than a month because there are so many forms that you're gathering from your partners that they have to sign, that you have to send in original, and you'll have to rework it so that the budget works out. So allow yourself a month, make the application date submitted 5 days before what it says, and make sure you get someone else to check it because there can be something really obvious. This woman here, Ivona, is fantastic. She is one of the people at this place called Access Europe Network. Their website actually lists the calls. If you register with them, they'll send you around when something of relevance comes up. You can also monitor. We know which calls we're interested in, so we now know more or less the cycle. They announce at the beginning of the year when they'll be publishing the next call. So an example is we missed out on a project, the one that I said where we had too many partners, and that was the main area where we lost the points. You get quite a detailed response from Europe telling you where your mistakes were. We waited, we kept monitoring because we're going to submit that same project. We're just ditching a couple of friends at the moment, which isn't so easy. But once we managed to ditch a couple of our partners, because we know the quality of the application was okay, so we have to just rework that enormous spreadsheet and rework a couple of the partners and how the partners are going to work, and we'll resubmit that. So we've been waiting until that is announced, and it was just announced maybe 2 weeks ago, and the submission date is mid-April. So we'll work on that between now and probably the end of March. We'll try to get that in. But because we knew what that call was, we just kept looking at the website until it was announced. So, but it sounds, the point to start is this Access Europe. They're really excellent. I said earlier that Big Lottery will provide some match funding for the European Social Fund. It's just been said that where you have to look is called Building Better Opportunities under the BLF website, Building Better Opportunities. Our problem with that has been getting into a LEP, that's a local enterprise partnership. And these things called local enterprise partnerships are organised at a local authority level, and you need to somehow, I say somehow because I don't know how to get into one. Do you have, are you going to answer that question for me?
Well, I've just been saying.
If you are interested in European funding, the best is to be a partner of a project first up. And when I say it takes a month to prepare a bid, even if you're a partner, you have to make time available for a number of weeks because the lead will be constantly asking you for different documents. You still have to write things. You can't get out, you can't think, oh, that's great, I'm a partner, I don't have to do anything. Even being a partner in these bids requires work, and that's the best way to dip your toe in the water. Be a partner, get used to the reporting requirements, get used to collecting your bus tickets and photocopying them and keeping them in a special place for 7 years. Just, get the practice going, the discipline, and learn about it, because they're not huge sums of money, but you can do some very good work with it if you get it for things that just aren't funded in the UK. The question really was a question about partnership working and making sure that the lead partner doesn't control everything, and that as a partner you're able to undertake the work that you agreed to undertake. I haven't experienced that because all the projects we've been involved in, we've just hoped to God that everyone gets on with it and does what they say, because we, don't have the resources to be checking or doing everybody else's work. And in fact, I haven't had that experience with where we've been partners. But what is problematic is if that's about, the lead organisation really needs to manage that differently. But the thing that does matter about partners, and why I say you need to pick your partners carefully, is if one of the partners doesn't do what they say they're going to do, or doesn't record their finances as they need to record, that has an impact on the whole project, because the way they pay these, it depends. Sometimes they pay 20% up front and then, or 30%, and then they'll make a couple of payments throughout the project. But they never ever pay the last 20% until after they've checked your final report and all the finances. And they're not only happy not to give you that final 20%, but they will demand money back if in looking at your report they can see work wasn't undertaken or there hasn't been good financial management. And I actually know of an organisation that essentially closed as a result of poor management of a European project. And it wasn't them, it was one of the partners that brought them down. But as I say, if you have the systems in place, that's really not going to happen. You just really follow it through. I mean, anyone who's got a legal aid contract is going to be used to this. It isn't any worse than legal aid contracts, let me say. As you know, with a legal aid contract, you have to do exactly what you're contracted to do. And if you don't have every last piece of evidence, say goodbye to the money. It's the same logic. But for people who aren't used to that level of scrutiny, it can be a bit of a rude shock. But I don't want to end on that scary note. What I want to say is use European Access. They're excellent. Contact us at LCM. We're more than happy to discuss any European funding. If you're interested, we can forward on when we hear about things. We're happy to help in any way at all, because up until you can get people to vote the right way in June, of course, because this could all go. But if it doesn't, as I say, it genuinely is. Once you've done the beginning and the end, the middle part is good work and stuff that you'll want to do. Somewhere or other it actually says they will not fund representation, just right across the board. Well, certainly in the equality and justice one. However, you can do some work, and we have done some casework, but it has to be relevant to the other work you're doing. It can't be all you're doing. So, for instance, again in living rights, where we've got community champions, we're working in communities. We anticipate there'll be issues arise that we need to give advice on. So we'll send them back to the agency, we'll give them advice. Some things may actually go to court, we don't know. But that is not the focus of the project. But that is described in our description that this may happen. But that's not all we can do. And if that was all we did, we'd have to give the money back. Not that we've got it yet, but, you know, one day. Okay, look, thanks everyone. It's now 1:15. Again, get this. Happy to give any tips or anything else, and good luck.